XRSI Global Technology Advisor, Chief Scientist of the Responsible Metaverse Alliance. Responsible Metaverse Alliance is also a supporter for Metaverse Safety Week, and founder of Luminous AI, Dr. Louis Rosenberg. An early pioneer of the virtual and augmented reality, Dr. Rosenberg earned his PhD from Stanford University and has been awarded over 300 patents for virtual reality, augmented reality, and artificial intelligence technologies. He has founded several XR companies, successful XR companies, including Immersum Corporation, Microscribe 3D, Outland Research, and Unanimous AI. Dr. Rosenberg began his work on the metaverse over 30 years ago at NASA and the Air Force Research Laboratory, where he developed the first functional augmented reality system. He has held academic positions and is currently the CEO of Unanimous AI, Chief Scientist of Responsible Metaverse Alliance, as I said, and Global Technology Advisor to XRSI. Please welcome Dr. Rosenberg.
Thanks, Kavya. To advance the slide, should I just say next?
Yes.
Great. So I am Louis Rosenberg, and today I'll be talking about privacy, security, and identity in the metaverse, and the new risks that will emerge if we don't have thoughtful policy to protect the public. And so thinking about really talking about the fact that metaverse is coming. In fact, I will talk about why I believe it's inevitable. Next, I'll talk about why the metaverse is so powerful, and talk about why that also means it's particularly dangerous. And finally, I'll talk about why the metaverse needs guardrails, and I'll talk about why that's actually good for everyone, not just consumers, but for the industry itself. Next. A few quick words about my background. Primarily that I've been involved in virtual and augmented reality for over 30 years. As Kavya said, I started as a researcher way back in 1991. Then I founded a number of companies: virtual reality company, augmented reality company, artificial intelligence company. I give that background primarily to say that I am a believer in the metaverse. I am a proponent of the metaverse. I actually believe the metaverse will be good for society. But over the last 30 years, I've also become quite concerned that there are very significant dangers. And I think it's very important that we talk about those dangers and we work to avoid them. Next. So what is the metaverse? I know lots of people have addressed this over the last 2 days worth of sessions. I think it's most important to think about the metaverse in the year 2030 and beyond. And I say that because when we're thinking about the risks and we're thinking about the remedies, we shouldn't be thinking about today. We should be thinking about tomorrow. And in the 2030s, the metaverse is not going to be the cartoonish world with cartoonish avatars that we see today. If we were having this meeting in the 2030s, it would likely look photorealistic. It would likely feel very genuine. And all of the impacts of the metaverse that we're just experiencing a little bit today will be significantly amplified within the next 10 years. Next. In fact, if we think about the 2030s, I will say that we will experience a metaverse that is fully immersive, is highly realistic, and is everywhere. And by everywhere, I mean it will not just be virtual worlds like the ones we're in right now. It will also be the real world, augmented and embellished with virtual content through augmented reality experiences. And I think it's important to consider that, to really realize that the metaverse will have these two facets because it impacts both the risks and the remedies. Next. So when I think about the 2030s, my view is that by the early 2030s, most people in the US will spend a few hours a day, at least, in virtual worlds for shopping, for socializing, for entertainment, for watching sports, for education, and many other targeted activities. I think by the early 2030s, we really will see virtual worlds rivaling television and movies for these type of targeted activities. In addition, in the 2030s, the real world will be embellished with virtual content, and this will drive adoption of augmented reality eyewear. In fact, by the mid-2030s, I feel pretty confident we will be transitioning from mobile phones to AR glasses as the primary interface that we use for accessing digital content throughout our day. In other words, in the 2030s, for many people, instead of carrying a phone around with them all day, they'll be in an augmented metaverse from the time they wake up to the time they go to sleep. That is our near future. It's not very far away. Next. So with that as context, when we're thinking about the metaverse, I think it's really important to think it's not about the technology, it's about people. And it's about how it impacts our digital lives. And I say that because there's so many conflicting definitions of the metaverse out there, and it's hard for people to agree on what the metaverse is. And I think that's partly because people focus too much on the technology and not on people, how it impacts people. If you look at it from the perspective of us, we can really think of the metaverse very broadly as this broad societal transition of our digital lives from experiences that are currently in flat media, viewed in the third person, to immersive media experienced in the first person. Our digital lives will make this transition to immersive media, and it will change everything. It will change the role of us as users, from outsiders looking in to participants with information all around us. And that's really significant. Next. Because it really points to the fact that the metaverse is a humanizing technology. And I really like to point that out, because so often when people see the metaverse for the first time, they see somebody wearing a VR headset and they think, oh, that looks creepy, that they don't look human. No, the metaverse is a humanizing technology because it presents information to us in the form that our perceptual system was meant to receive it, as immersive spatial content all around us. It's how we evolved to understand our world and to explore our world and to remember our world and to interact with our world. And this is why I firmly believe the metaverse is inevitable. It's in our DNA. It's how we were meant to interact with information, not by holding screens and staring down at them, but by having content all around us immersively. Next. Because of this, the metaverse is extremely powerful. It impacts us in very personal, visceral ways. For those same exact reasons, it's very dangerous because it impacts us in very personal and visceral ways. Next slide. And so when we're thinking about the dangers, I really like to break it up into three categories. And a lot of these have been discussed in various panels and presentations for the last 2 days. But I break them up as dangers from other users, dangers from bad actors, and dangers from big tech. Next. In terms of dangers from other users, these are problems that we're familiar with in today's world. Problems like hate, harassment, bullying, assault, things like stalking and pedophilia. Except in the metaverse, these are problems. The solutions are a few, one of which is platform moderation. But this is much harder in the metaverse than in today's world of social media, because in social media, moderating bad content means stopping something from spreading too far. Metaverse is real time. Platform moderation means real-time protection of people. It's very, very difficult. It's not a solved problem. It will likely involve AI technologies. But these are things that really we need to focus on to make sure that we can moderate these worlds quickly, because the time when harm happens is so fast. The second solution is persistent identity. People don't behave badly to each other, or nearly as badly to each other, in the real world as they do online. And one of the big reasons for that is identity. In the real world, you have a persistent identity. I think that's going to be required in the metaverse, but it creates this new tension of identity versus privacy. I'm a proponent of both. And this creates an unsolved tension as we go forward. It's one of the other really big things that we need to solve moving forward. Next slide. If we move forward to dangers from bad actors, here we're talking about fraudsters, hackers, con artists. In the metaverse, identity theft will actually evolve into virtual impersonation. We talk a lot about digital twins. In the metaverse, there will be evil twins who pretend to be people you know, coworkers, friends, family, to get information out of you. They'll pretend to be you. Very difficult problem. It means that in the metaverse, platform security is going to become even more important than it is in today's social media platforms. This means identity verification is significant. Without it, people will not trust these environments. But again, it means we need to solve this identity versus privacy issue. To me, one of the biggest unsolved problems right now in the metaverse. Next slide. And finally, I want to talk about dangers from big tech, which I would say is platforms. And this is an area that I focus on the most, so I'll talk about it more because it doesn't get as much discussion as some of the other issues. But the problem here is that the metaverse could give large, powerful platforms unparalleled power over people. And the solution, I believe, is most likely regulation. Without regulation of metaverse platforms, I think we will see problems very similar to social media, but much worse. Next slide. And so when we're thinking about the dangers from big tech, it's not the technology that I worry about, it's the power that platforms could have over the lives of ordinary people. And I think it's important for us to think about the lessons learned from social media, because we can learn a lot from the recent past. Next slide. So social media is, in some sense, very similar technology. 15 years ago, we saw it as a utopian technology. We really believed it was going to give voice to the voiceless, bring people together, reduce cultural barriers, be a public square for healthy dialogue. Social media actually did all of those things. But at the same time, next slide, it went from this utopia to a dystopia, where we now see social media has polarized society, spread misinformation, reduced trust in science and facts, reduced trust in institutions, radicalized populations. It's been destructive to society. And in fact, Pew Research did a poll just a little over a year ago where they asked Americans what they think of social media, and 64% of Americans thought social media was damaging to society. 64%, and that was a year ago. It's probably more now. Why? Why did it make this transition from utopian to dystopian? Next slide. It wasn't the technology that did it. It was the business models. Next slide. So what's the business models of social media? What can we learn? Well, it's an ad-based business model. And what an ad-based business model means is that the business of these large platforms is really to become experts in two primary skills. One, tracking and profiling users, tracking where you click, what you buy, who your friends are, and storing and generating user profiles that allow for precision targeting. And then two, selling targeted influence, targeted ads, targeted news feeds, targeted content, and selling that to the highest bidder. And you end up with this destructive cycle for society, where these platforms over the last 15 years have gotten better and better at tracking, so they can get better and better at selling targeted influence, which then means they want to get better and better at tracking and profiling to get better and better at selling targeted influence, and they've polarized society. I don't think it was intentional. I don't think it was evil. This is a business models that evolved, and it created this dystopian cycle. We can learn from that. We can try to avoid that when we think about the metaverse. Next slide. So what's the metaverse risks for large platforms? Well, the biggest risk is that we go towards ad-based business models. Because if we go towards ad-based business models, we can guarantee we'll fall into this exact same dystopian cycle of tracking and profiling users and selling targeted influence. The problem is it will end up being much worse than social media. Next slide. That's because, for example, tracking and profiling of users in the metaverse makes social media look like child's play. In social media, platforms can track where you click, what you buy, who your friends are. In the metaverse, and again, we're talking both virtual and augmented, platforms will be able to track where you go, what you do, who you're with, what direction you're looking, how long your gaze lingers. They can track your gait and your posture. So you can imagine you're walking down the street in the real world that's augmented or a virtual world, and platforms could know what stores you're looking in windows of and how long are you looking and what does your posture reflect in terms of your emotions and your gait in terms of your emotions. And it goes beyond that, because in metaverse platforms, we'll also be able to track your facial expressions, your vocal inflections, and most likely your vital signs. They will do that in order to be able to infer your emotions. So now, next slide, we can think of metaverse platforms as being able to monitor your whole life. What you do, what you say, what you experience, and what you feel while doing those things by looking at your emotions. These platforms would then be able to create behavioral profiles that can predict what you will do in any situation, and also create emotional profiles that will predict how you will feel in any situation. This is obviously a really dangerous privacy issue, but the bigger issue is what will they do with this information? Next slide. The danger is that they will then use this to sell targeted influence. But advertising and propaganda in the metaverse, it's not going to be flat ads and videos. It will be immersive experiences that change the world around you for promotional purposes. Next slide. So let's think of an example. Imagine that you're walking down the street in the metaverse, right? Walking down the street, either virtual or augmented, and maybe I pass a young couple having a conversation about some great new restaurant that they went to, or a new car they just bought, or a new movie they just saw, whatever. And I overhear maybe 20 seconds, and then our paths diverge. I'm influenced by hearing this exchange, believe it to be an authentic encounter among real people in this world. What I don't realize is that, no, that was a targeted promotional experience that was injected into my surroundings on behalf of a third party, because this is an ad-based business model. And in fact, the age, gender, ethnicity, clothing, speaking style of that virtual couple was all chosen by AI to maximize its influence on me based on profile data that was collected about me over time. Even the dialogue between that couple, custom crafted in real time by AI based on my personal interests to maximize persuasion. This could influence me deeply. Without guardrails, I might not even know that that was a targeted promotional experience. I might think it was authentic, serendipitous experience. That is how different the metaverse is to previous forms of media. Next slide. Now imagine that instead of just overhearing dialogue, I have a different experience. Say I'm in a virtual coffee house and someone walks up to me and strikes up a conversation. They look like everyone else in this world. They're an avatar. It could be photorealistic. And they start telling me about their job, how much they love working there, how it's the greatest company they've ever worked for. Again, I might think this is an authentic experience, not realize that I was just targeted by a recruiter that paid to influence me towards wanting to work for that company. I was engaged in a promotional conversation by an AI avatar that was indistinguishable from other people, but can generate an optimized pitch based on my profile and actually even adapt its conversational tactics based on my facial expressions, my vocal inflections, my blood pressure. That's the danger of the metaverse. This is a real-time environment where a third party can control the world around you to influence you while tracking your behaviors and your emotions. We've never experienced that before, and we need to put guardrails in place to protect consumers. Next slide. And so when we think about selling targeted influence in the metaverse, I like to break it up into really two categories. Instead of it being, flat ads and pop-up videos, it's going to be virtual product placements and virtual spokespeople. Virtual product placements that are put into your world as promotional content. It could be indistinguishable from other content. You might not know that it's promotional, or virtual spokespeople that engage you in conversation and you might not know that they're virtual. Next slide. Sometimes people say, oh, you're not going to be fooled by virtual spokespeople. There was just a study this year from Lancaster University that showed that virtual people, when tested, are now indistinguishable. People cannot tell the difference. All of these faces are AI generated. People cannot tell the difference anymore between AI generated faces and real faces. And the scary thing about this study is that while you couldn't tell the difference, most people rated the virtual faces, the AI generated faces, as more trustworthy. So of course advertisers are going to use those to influence people. Next slide. So I feel the metaverse, unless there's guardrails, could be the most dangerous tool of persuasion that we've ever created. Can track what you do and feel, can generate detailed behavioral and promotional profiles. It can alter the world around you without you knowing it, and it can adjust its tactics in real time using AI to optimize influence. Next slide. So do we need guardrails? Yes. Interactive forms of targeted influence is not something we've ever dealt with before at scale, especially not when it's immersive, when it's real time, and when it's mediated by AI. Next slide. What kind of protections can we put in place? Well, let's think about tracking and profiling. When we're talking about tracking your behaviors, where you go, what you do, where you look, where your gaze lingers, we need transparency, meaning platforms need to reveal what is tracked and when it's tracked, so that you at least know that if you're walking down the street and you look into a store window, somebody can see that you're doing that. You need to know that all the time. But even more important, we need to limit profiling or even ban profiling so that you cannot build up this behavioral profile for individuals so you know not just what you're doing in real time, that you looked in that store window, but you can't build up this profile over days and weeks and months to know exactly what people do throughout their day, because with those profiles, they can then create behavioral models and use that to influence you. Then looking at emotions, tracking and profile of emotions, facial expressions, vocal inflections, posture, gait, vital signs, transparency. Platforms need to reveal. If they're sensing or inferring your emotions and sentiments, you need to know that they're doing that and why. I also believe that there should be no profiling. We need to restrict the storage of emotional and sentiment data. Otherwise, these profiles, these platforms can watch every reaction you have during the day, thousands of reactions a day, and build up these profiles to know how you respond to every stimulus you encounter. That's extremely dangerous. And I believe that we probably need to consider a ban on the use of vital signs, biometrics, for anything other than health and safety, health and wellness related. I don't think most people want to be engaged in an interactive advertisement that is adjusting its tactics based on sensing your pupil dilation and your blood pressure. But if there's not guardrails, that's what platforms will do. The first platform that does it and shows that they can drive really good influence will create an arms race with other platforms to do it. But if there's guardrails in place, then no platforms have to go in that direction. And I don't think they want to go in that direction, which is why I believe that guardrails, regulation, policy is actually good for everyone. It's good for the industry and it's good for consumers because everyone can focus on competing for positive experiences rather than competing on who can create the most persuasive advertising vehicle ever created. Next slide. In terms of advertising, which in the metaverse could be targeted influence, again, it could be virtual product placements, virtual spokespeople. I believe transparency is key. Platforms, if a platform is injecting into your world a parked car that is put there just for you to see, or somebody drinking a Red Bull put there just for you to see, you need to know that is not an authentic experience. It was placed there specifically to influence you. Virtual product placements, therefore, should have to look different so that you at least know that it's advertising. And ideally, platforms should reveal who put that there, who's paying for that virtual product placement to be there to influence you. When it comes to virtual spokespeople, same thing. Platforms should be required to distinguish between authentic avatars that are other real people in this world and AI agents that are placed there to interact with you and potentially engage you in promotional conversation. They should look different. They should sound different. So at least you know when you're interacting with a real person versus a piece of targeted persuasion. And in fact, platforms should have to reveal who the third party is that put that promotional avatar into your world and what the agenda is of that promotional avatar. And finally, I believe that platforms, that we should ban the use of conversational agents that adapt themselves based on your sensed emotions. If I'm engaged in a promotional conversation with an AI avatar, do I want that avatar to be able to adjust its tactics based on looking at my subtle micro expressions on my face, and subtle changes in my vocal inflection? I don't think so. I think that that's way too dangerous. I mean, already AI systems can beat the world's best chess player and Go player and poker player. What chance do we have as consumers if we're engaged in a promotional conversation with an AI agent that has access to our behavioral history, our emotional history, and is actually adapting itself based on our facial expressions? I think we will very easily be convinced to buy things we don't need, believe things that aren't true. The danger is extreme, but guardrails can be simply put in place that can protect the public and ensure that platforms can compete just making the best experiences rather than making the most persuasive tool. So with all that said, concluding remarks, I believe the metaverse will happen. It will transform society over the next 10 years, but we need guardrails. If we don't have guardrails, the problems could be worse than today's social media. I also believe that now is the time to push for solutions, especially for regulation, because the metaverse is currently in the formative stage. We can put regulations in place and not disrupt business models of major platforms because they haven't adopted their business models. I think it will be good for the industry because it will build trust. If users don't trust these platforms, the industry will struggle. Guardrails would ensure that consumers and platforms can focus on what's important, which is positive experiences for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Luis, for yet another insightful presentation, and especially because you've been tracking this from the very inception for almost 30 years. Hearing from you, this makes a huge difference for all the stakeholders. Because you're looking at the technology itself and looking into the future, just like you always have. So really appreciate all your efforts, and you are the chief scientist of the supporter Responsible Metaverse Alliance, and really appreciate their contribution trying to actually map out the guardrails that should be put in place. So thank you so much. And please remember, everyone, you are welcome to interact with our speakers. There is a lobby that you can also hang out at. Also remember, Metaverse Safety Week continues on tomorrow all the way until December 15th. Tomorrow, we will return with a focus on children's safety, children's rights. And I wonder, Luis, I know that we're kind of over time, but since you're here and it's such an opportunity, should we even take a couple of questions? If
Sure,
there are any questions?
Happy to.
Okay, that's great. The panelists, you can either, audience, you can either come up towards the stage, or you can just click on raise hand. That's enabled, and you'll be able to ask any question to Dr. Rosenberg. And I know, Luis, yesterday, this is something that I was anyway going to ask you, since you are one of our advisors currently working on some of the human rights aspects. Yesterday, while other people raise their hands, I have I'm dying to ask this question from some of our key advisors, so I'm going to put that in public, actually. Yesterday, during our conversation with UNDP, a point came up where the point was that we should be utilizing the existing human rights. And I know we're talking more about virtual content, virtual influencers, etc. But then it occurred to me, should we be looking at new types of rights or new types of ways to regulate? Or should we still be holding on to or trying to find context in sort of older apparatus? Because to me, it was a bit of a question that I couldn't resolve myself. I was like, I need advice on this. And I think it's going to be a question for a lot of regulators and stakeholders too. What do you think we are to do in this scenario?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I do think that in a lot of existing human rights certainly apply. I mean, all existing human rights apply in the metaverse. The big issue is that there are completely new issues that will come up in the metaverse that really haven't come up in the physical world. And And I think that it's easy for us to underestimate the significance of those changes. I often think, why did we underestimate the danger of social media? I think we underestimated the danger of social media because we were familiar with advertising business models. Television and radio had been around for decades and decades and decades, and we figured, okay, that it's not that dangerous. We know what we understand it. Social media can have advertising. What we didn't realize is that social media wasn't, had a little bit of a feedback loop that the television advertising didn't have, where it could track people and then target them. And that targeting created all the danger that we just, we missed. When we go to the metaverse, it's this other step where now it's real time. Now platforms can change your reality in real time and track you in real time. We've never considered that before. And we need, it brings up completely new rights, like rights to being able to tell the difference between a real person and an AI generated person. Like that hasn't come up before in history. And there are a number of really important human rights that we have to consider because they just weren't possible before, and they are extremely dangerous if we don't deal with them.
Yeah, thank you. And this is a conversation we're going to continue discussing with the Human Rights Commission of Australia, with stakeholders from the United Nations, sometimes in closed roundtables, but oftentimes in an open setting in 2023. So thank you, Luis. I don't see any other question, but certainly, you're absolutely welcome. Stick around, and I'm sure people will be keen to come up to you and ask questions. Again.